Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus, a monthly series airing on Fridays. This is a space for our opinions, where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we're joined by Oscar Sanchez, the Community Planning Manager of Southeast Environmental Task Force. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, claro. Thank you for having me.
So I kind of want to go to the basics of your line of work. Can you explain what environmental racism is? Because I don't think it's a term that everyone is familiar with.
Definitely. So the context between environmental racism is really showing the environmental burden that Black and Brown individuals go through. And a really good way of looking at this is talking about, Chicago is one map. And many people know about this, they don't. But when you overlap the individuals who are the most poor, demographics of Black and Brown individuals, who's most environmentally burdened, as well as where there's heat waves most frequently, where the industrial corridors are, where there's a lot of contamination going on, where's the most polluted, who has the worst respiratory issues. It's all overlapping. And I think that's when we talk about what is, the cumulative impact of, this environmental burden that people go through. And environmentally burdened really results in being a result of racism and very directly formed from housing policies back in the 1930s. So we talk about segregation and redlining, and a lot of that, the byproduct of it has been environmental burdens. And we directly connect the dots of saying in racism, this with environmental burden, therefore we are facing environmental racism.
So these complexities really it's complex, right? It ties into a lot of things that have been going on for a very long time in Chicago that haven't been addressed, like mainstream, would you say?
Definitely, I think it's complex, but I want to kind of say like it's intertwined, right? There's an intersectionality of all these issues going on when you talk about housing policies, when it comes to labor rights, when it comes to abortion rights. A lot of them are connected when it comes to these environmental movements, because for many years we've been silenced, or it hasn't even been considered something to be quote unquote serious or of a priority. One of the most prevalent examples of this is, before the 2000s, medical doctors weren't allowed to say that industry was causing respiratory issues. They weren't allowed to say that industry was causing asthma. So around the 2000, around 2000s to 2000, 2001, UC Berkeley actually came out with a study looking at actually how respiratory issues are caused by living close to industrial corridors. And then from there on, medical doctors can be like, okay, it's because of your environment. So this happened in the 2000s. We're in 2022 now, 22 years from then. We have to think about how recent these events are happening and how we're barely trying to make a dent in these alleviation of it, right? We always talk about restorative justice. Restorative justice isn't just sitting down in a circle and talking about our issues or how we connect. It's really talking about how are we looking to alleviate or create mediation for those individuals affected by these environmental burdens. And many times they're left out of the conversations. And that's why, for me, that work is very important, because the people affected by this, again, are marginalized communities, Black and Brown communities, undocumented communities, LGBTQA. And I think many people don't look to connect those dots. And again, yes, it's complex, but it's intersectional. That means that if we move one part, it'll move everything else. And that's why I always talk about, we have to do this together.
That's a lot. This is a lot. This is going to be a great conversation, but I want to talk a little bit about you first, just to provide context. You grew up on the southeast side of Chicago, and you're a very active member of the community. What prompted you to get so involved?
Privilege. To be honest with you, privilege. So I think I think that's the immigrant story always. Right? I mean, I come from a household of immigrants, undocumented individuals, and they told me when I was young, they're like, "What are you going to do with your life?" And not in a way that was antagonizing or looking to shame me, or more of a challenge. Like they're like, "Mijo," they said, "Son, like you are tall, you are loud, you are white complected, you are the lightest son out of all our sons." And then the magic thing, right, that every immigrant parent says, you are documented, you have papers, right? You can't be scared. So something that they first started saying is like, hey, like you should advocate for us, advocating for undocumented folks. And of course, full circle, I've learned that the way you uplift voices of undocumented individuals is by allowing them to know that they themselves can be their own voices. They don't need anyone else. Well, we serve as folks who are documented are to be allies. We are in no way or shape, form being able to in any way really understand what those struggles look like, even if my parents were undocumented. So again, full circle. But that's what prompted me. They're like, you have all these things. What are you going to do? And I started with undocumented organizing. When I helped, fundraise, nothing lucrative, right? I would just go out and, kind of volunteer with some Ciento Trabajadores Unidos, an undocumented and labor rights organization here in the Southeast side. I did that for like 2 years, and afterwards in college, went to move and actually did more of educational organizing when it came to institutions, and then looked at working at creating, helping. Again, I didn't do a lot of the work up front. I was more of like, hey, Oscar, try to figure this out, talk to some folks. So also pushed financial aid to be pushed for, or to be allowed and accepted for undocumented individuals. So then again, my whole thing was always making sure we uplift undocumented individuals. So from documented to then educational, serving on the Illinois State Board for the community colleges, and then serving on Rodner's Youth Commission cabinets, and then moving forward to being more community prone. And then I think everything stopped when I started doing organizing in the Southwest side. I was really, invited by my friends in college saying, hey, you're doing all these cool things, come, why don't you want to hang out with us and do it over here? And I said, hey, yeah, that sounds like fun. The thing that stopped that, though, or didn't stop it, it changed, it's really changed my gears, is my mother. She said, and this is me being very vulnerable when I say this, she said, you have a brother going through depression, and you have our needs in this community in the Southeast side. They're very prevalent. We're very scarce on the resources we have. Why aren't you doing work here? And that's where I took a step back and said, what does community look like for me? In a community that, is under-resourced, a community that's very much ignored, what does it look like? And because nobody that I saw at that time was really organizing, or anybody my age. And I felt, what do we do? And, I think we'll be talking about this later, but that's when we started talking about where I saw someone talking about, I always give credit to Louis Corrales, a really good friend of mine. And he was like, hey, he put a Facebook post saying like, hey, tell the folks talking bad about the community. He's like, just leave. He's like, if you're going to talk bad and leave, like, just stay out of the conversation. We're trying to make sure we don't have a negative stigma here. Like, we're trying to survive. We're looking to thrive. And I reached out, I'm like, hey, let's do an organization. And that's how the Southeast Youth Alliance was created. But again, full circle, a lot of this was prompted by my family, always looking at and challenging me to work differently. And I think with all of my mentors and every spaces, I've been always working with intention. We have to be intentional about the solutions, and it's not about having the right answers. It's about asking the right questions.
You mentioned an important point about the Southeast side, because I feel like it's an area that's very overlooked, right? By the media, by politicians, even by people who live in other areas of Chicago. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? It's often overlooked. I think we have to really use the word neglected.
Mm.
So Chicago's Southeast side was we can say quote unquote plentiful, in a community of abundance. It has a rich history when it comes to immigration movement here, when it comes to both African Americans, the Black population, as well as Mexican Americans or Mexicans coming here for the steel mills. But when the steel mills closed, we had nothing. And I think a lot of folks say we miss those days. But I think what people miss a lot is being able to have financial stability, because those jobs ruin their health. But after the stimulus, there was nothing here to offer anyone, right? There weren't jobs. The employment here is very industry focused. So if you're not, and then a lot of them are from communities. Like one of the industries, they house like 50% of people in the community work, for example, at the Ford plant.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, that's what it is here. So we're overlooked because no one really looks to work here. Tourism here, we have phenomenal green spaces. We have a state park. We have Wolf Lake. So we have amazing resources here to an extent that we see the beauty in them, and there are gems. But I think we're always overlooked because we don't have anything, quote unquote, to offer, folks outside, right? You think of other, let's be very honest. Let's talk about gentrified communities. We talk about Pilsen being vibrant. We talk about La Vejita being vibrant. We talk about, the Chicago Riverwalk. People look to be in a space that's full of joy. The Southeast side, we can be very honest, is that our community members are full of joy, and they're fighting that, and they're looking to build that. That's our resistance, building that joy. But when you come outside our community, you see all the scrap metal and you see all the different types of operations here. You don't want to be around that. And we don't either. I mean, that's the story. We don't want that here.
So I want to cut really quick too. In 2021, you were part of a group of protesters who participated in a hunger strike against General Iron. What was that experience like?
What was that experience like? So I think this comes from any immigrant family, an individual coming from marginalized communities. When your grandma knows you're not eating, she's gonna call you consistently. So I think that experience itself was really traumatizing. Because it's always the question, why do we have to go through a hunger strike in order to receive any type of notice on what's going on? And there's many issues, right? General Iron is one of the many issues that we are facing. However, being very concrete, the environmental issues aren't only going around in the Southeast side. But going back to specifically that experience, it was something that, again, it was really harmful because we were going through this, but we felt a lot of solidarity and love from our community members. We had letters being sent from high school, elementary schools, telling how much love they had for us, being there with us. And although many people didn't agree with that tactic, people agreed that, nobody would have listened otherwise. So I say this, that I wouldn't have survived without my community, and we did this with community. But again, we the way I look at this, like no one should have to go through a hunger strike in order to have life or in order to fight for life.
As you mentioned, you're the co-founder of the Southeast Youth Alliance. Something that really caught my attention about the activism work going on in your community was how involved the youth was in organizing and voicing their opinions. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Definitely. I think something that I've really been thinking about lately, and it's because I was a youth, right? When the Southeast Youth Alliance was founded, that was 4 years ago. I was around 20, 21 years old when that happened. I was still considered youth. And now that I'm getting older, I'm like, am I even a youth? I'm youthful. I'm always going to have my inner child being, very, present in the way I do work. But I always tell folks to close their eyes and ask themselves, what do they see in 5 to 10 years? And they can't, because 5 to 10 years ago, the future we see and we're living through right now, it's unpredictable. But if you fight towards a future, we can see it. And that's what youth are. Youth are our living future right now. And if we empower them and give them love and we embrace them, they're the ones that are going to create the future we need. So that's why we involve youth all the time, because they're the ones that are going to be changing everything. They are the change. They are everything. But we also must let them enjoy their youth. I involve youth, but I also tell youth, rest, go play, be a child. It's okay to be a child. Your community is going to be here to back you up when it comes to these actions or being represented or having your voice, but please be a child first. You deserve to be loved in that way.
I agree. It's very inspiring to see youth step up and really fight for things that they believe in. But like you said, at the same time, these are still children, and it really shouldn't be their responsibility, right? Because they should be able to just be kids and enjoy life and not have to worry about things like this in their neighborhood. But again, it just is really inspiring to see at such a young age, people really take a stance on things.
Yeah. And I think one thing to talk about that and be emphasis that you have to think about how much people are seeing others suffer in order for them to take action. And that's why it's happening.
We are running out of time, and it's very unfortunate because we have so many other things we could talk about. But really quickly, I want to just ask if you have any resources to share with our viewers so they can learn a little bit more.
Definitely. So I say if folks want to get involved in anything, you can, right? Organizing is very easy. It's a four-step process. You see an issue, you think of solution, you think of folks that want to work on that solution with you, and you implement it. So get involved, right? There's a Southeast Environmental Task Force, there's a Southeast Youth Alliance, there's other environmental issues going on, like in Pilsen, Little Village, you have Sims, but let's talk about the organizations. There's Alvejo, there's PCR, there's Neighbors for EJ. There's so many environmental groups to get involved with. And I say, please look them up. There's a lot to offer, and you have a lot to offer. So don't cut yourself short, and you're deserving of a better community.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking with us today, and thank you for being our guest.
Lara, appreciate you all, bendiciones.
Join us next time for another episode. For more information about our discussion today, check out our web story on ILLatinonews.com and follow us on Twitter at ILLatinonews. I'm Annabelle Rocha with Illinois Latino News Opinion Plus. See you next time.